Alright, good. Looking good. Alright. Right. That's okay. Thank you guys. Welcome. We're still here. The literary festival is still happening.
Right, exactly. Raise the glass.
Alright, so we've had 15 days of fairly serious discussions. A couple incidents, not too many, not too bad. Women's rights, Hong Kong, journalism, economy, art, language, etc. Tonight will not be one of those sessions, so you can exhale, I can exhale. Sit back in your chair, slouch a little bit, and feel free to heckle. We have paired 5 whiskies with 5 stories told by 5 authors. They are sitting to my left here. One of them's in the back. That's okay. He's not drinking, and he's the closest person to a Scot that we have in here, Scotsman. Interestingly enough. So this is the way it's going to work. I'm going to give some general information about whiskey, or whatever I want. And then 2 of my helpers, Julia and Mariana, you guys will stand up so that people can see you. Okay. They'll then go around and pour for those who have drinks. After that, I'm going to introduce the writer. He'll come up, or she'll come up, tell the story, and then afterwards I'll tell you a little bit more about the thing that you just drank. Okay? So, what do we know about whiskey? These delicious, yeah? Right, I can't wait to see you guys in 30 minutes. The Scots began making whiskey more than 500 years ago. The word is Gaelic, whiskey is Gaelic, meaning water of life. For malt whiskeys, it seems like your companions can. The process of making malt whiskey is through something called the pot still process, which includes malting, fermenting, distillation, and maturation. Okay? And I'm not going to go over what all of those are, but it's basically a complicated process that includes a little bit of chemistry and a little bit of magic. For the single malts up here, I'll explain what that means in a little bit, but no, I'll explain it now. The word single malt, so a single malt is a type of whiskey that is made with only one type of grain. Who can tell me what that grain is? It's not wheat, it's barley. All single malts have only 3 ingredients. It's barley, water, and yeast. That's it. And that's kind of what makes it special, the final product special, because with only 3 ingredients, we can get a wide variety of characteristics, flavor profiles, etc. All single malts have to be aged for 3 years. If you're in Scotland, it's 3 years plus 1 day. Otherwise, you can't call it a single malt in Scotland. You can't call it a single malt Scotch, rather. But today, we also have a couple of American whiskeys here for you, and I'll explain a little bit when we get there what the differences are. Okay? We also have a Japanese whiskey too, which is not a single malt, but a blend. And I'm going to save that one for last because it is amazing. If you would allow me, though, I would like to begin tonight with an invocation. I think it's appropriate. We don't, as I mentioned, we don't have any Scotsmen up here. But the closest thing, I think, to creating this kind of environment is with a little poetry. So I have a short one for you. It's called, appropriately enough, Tasting. And it's a love poem. Tasting. Caramel, toffee, apple, salt. creosote and cigar smoke, asphalt flecked with acacia and pine, Malmsey and Madeira on Sirocco. Mature whiskies are joy softened in the after sun of snowstorm. Some rewards do not require enrichment with words and fall outside the boundaries of flavor maps. What if whiskey flavors were applied to life? Vanilla dust, a skate rut on untouched ice, an orchard of dahlias for that first hello. Manuka honey, a story from childhood. Penny Royal, a memory we hope to share. And a nettle that knocked me sideways the moment your eyes opened. Okay. Our first writer is an artist, our first story presenter is an artist, filmmaker, and writer. His films have been screened in more than 24 countries, and his work features in Time Out's 1,000 Films to Change Your Life and A History of Experimental Film and Video. He's been nominated for several awards, and his films include Follow the Master, Dummy Jim, and most recently The Hippies, Punk Rocked My Cradle. You might have seen him at the literary festival Matt Hulse.
Thank you very much. Hi everyone.
Hello.
I'll try and keep this succinct so you can get onto your drinking. So the reason I'm here at this festival is thanks to this little journal, which is called I Cycled into the Arctic Circle. And it was written by a Scotsman, a profoundly deaf Scotsman, published in 1955. In 1951, he got on his bicycle and he cycled from northeast Scotland to the Arctic Circle, although his original intention was to cycle to Morocco. My mum sent me this very copy, in fact, for Christmas in the year 2000, and within a few pages I decided that it would be the making of my first feature-length film. 13 years later, the film premiered at the Rotterdam Film Festival. And the film was called Dummy Jim, that was his nickname in his local community. And I have DVDs available for sale tonight. Now, when it took 13 years to make a film, I thought, this is the sort of length of study that people get PhDs for. And I thought I should maybe write a bit about that whole process, and that's what's brought me to the festival. I've recently republished James Duthie's original journal in this book, I Cycled into the Arctic Circle, A Peregrination by James Duthie and Matt Hulse. So it's a copy of his original, a facsimile pretty much, and then a section which is my reflections on the process of making the film and the 13-year journey to completion. It's fully illustrated, lots and lots of anecdotes, communication between me and various collaborators on the project, and it's available at Bookworm. Okay, so I'm going to present for you some readings from James Duthie's journal, and then some other interesting items. So this is from May the 12th. He set off on May the 7th, I believe. So this is a few days into his journey, and he's reached Dover. May the 12th. I left here for Dover via Royston, Huntingdon, Ware, London, Rhythm Heath, Maidstone, Lenham and Canterbury. London is almost situated in the same latitude with Antwerp in Belgium, Leipzig in Germany, Bristol in England and Cork in Ireland. On my arrival in Dover, I missed a steamer at the Western Docks in the afternoon. The pilot informed me that I might call here to catch a steamer for Calais at 1 p.m. tomorrow. I had covered 666 miles from Cairnbulg. Cairnbulg was his hometown. The French cliffs may be seen from the summit of the Dover Cliffs, where I sojourned overnight in my tent above the mighty docks. I noticed that 2 white-clothed cargoes were passing the Straits of Dover far off the docks. I photographed the docks in the sectional cliff with its sloping footpath. May the 13th. At Dover, I visited some war ruins beside the beach. I returned to the western docks, where I spoke to an English gentleman. Friendliness grew firmer between us. He accompanied me to the steamer when our British passports were examined. At 1 p.m, the steamer departed for Calais across the Straits of Dover. After a shave and wash, I happened to meet a Scottish hiker in Gordon's tartan kilt. He asked, "Are you a deaf and dumb Cairnbulg man who is intending a great travel of encouragement to Morocco?" "Yes," I replied, "but how did you know me?" He replied that he had heard about me in the Buchan Observer, the well-known Peterhead weekly newspaper. I laughingly said to him, "I'm amazed to hear what you say. My name has been mentioned in different papers in England too, for an English gentleman who sought me." "Will you please go in and hurry upstairs to join me in the dining room for dinner?" he said. "Yes," I replied. We had a first-class dinner. So some while later, May the 29th, he's in Germany, having already turned back from his way to Morocco. May the 29th. I passed Hamburg, which is a seaport town. Oh, I've just noticed a typo. Typical, isn't it? Anyway, as the tagline of the film is, "He who makes no mistakes makes nothing," so it's all... Anyway, I passed Hamburg, which is the seaport town in the Prussian province of Hanover on the left bank of the south arm of the Elbe. After my arrival, I bought some brownish black bread at the German baker's shop in Hamburg. I saw many houseless streets and some ruined buildings which were terribly overwhelmed by the Royal Air Force and the other Allied airmen during the Second World War. I passed the twin towers of the mighty road bridge above the Elbe to the northern boundary of this industrial, commercial city. I went ahead to Rendsburg in the direction of Neumünster. The afternoon I described as pale greenish blue with white clouds and fine sunshine. I saw a Russian motor cargo passing an open bridge after reaching Rendsburg. A communist flag waved at the stern of the cargo. Rendsburg is situated on the Kaiser Wilhelm Canal, which is the safest, most convenient, shortest and cheapest route from the North Sea and the Baltic, increasingly used by merchant vessels. It is known as the Kiel Canal. The German policeman ordered me to go back to the road, but I took no notice of him. I think he must still be a pro-Nazi sympathizer. So he's now, this is summer solstice, he's in the north of Sweden. Day before summer solstice, June the 20th. At about 6:30, in the bright sunny morning, I awoke with a terrific thirst. In the land of the midnight sun, the number of hours of bright sunshine in summer is greater than it is either in Rome or Madrid. I can prove this to be true. I lifted a bottle of water out of my rucksack for a drink, as I felt a bit sick and dizzy. I gathered all my belongings and started to cycle over the Arctic Circle to Jokkmokk via Vuollerim. Jokkmokk is very close in the neighbourhood of the Arctic Circle. I was amazed to look at a young Lap lady as she left the baker's shop for a walk home. She was dressed in a blackish blue coat, black shoes and nylon stockings. A rich red ball in the top of her blackish blue hat looked something like the Scottish thistle. It has been a wonderful experience to see numerous Lap residents in the streets. At the moment, they are not very far advanced, but gently and without undue compelling of their natural growth, they are being ushered by the Swedes into the atomic age. So that was Mr. James Duthie. Now, you might wonder what inspired me to pick up his journal and put all that effort into making a film. Well, I have a great love of eccentrics and sort of outsider writers, mavericks, and two of these happen to be Scots, Ivor Cutler and also William McGonagall. Do you know these people? Well, I'll talk about William McGonagall first. This is a little bio from Wiki. William Topaz McGonagall, poet and tragedian of Dundee, has been widely held as the writer of the worst poetry in the English language. A self-educated hand-loom weaver of Irish descent, he discovered his discordant muse in 1877 and embarked upon a 25-year career as a working poet, delighting and appalling audiences across Scotland and beyond. His audiences threw rotten fish at him, the authorities banned his performances, and he died a pauper over a century ago. But his books remain in print to this day, and he's remembered and quoted long after more talented contemporaries have been forgotten. I'm a very big fan of William McGonagall, and there can only be one world's worst poet. This is what I love. Anyway, he wrote loads of different verses, and he was quite fond of sort of historic verse. And I managed to find one that he'd written about China, and he spelt Honan. So I'm going to use his original spelling. The Great Yellow River Inundation in China. He's well known for being verbose, so I'll kind of try and rattle through this. 'Twas in the year of 1887 on the 20th of September, which many people of Honan in China will long remember, especially those that survived the mighty deluge that fled to the mountains and tops of trees for refuge. The river burst its embankments suddenly at dead of night, and the rushing torrent swept all before it, left and right, all over the province of Honan, which for its fertility is commonly called by historians the Garden of China. The river was at its fullest when the embankment gave way, and when the people heard it, oh horror and dismay! 'Twas then fathers and mothers leapt from their beds without delay, and some saved themselves from being drowned, but thousands were swept away. Oh, it was horrible and most pitiful scene to hear fathers and mothers and their children loudly scream, as the merciless water encircled their bodies around, while the water spirits laughed to see them drowned. Oh, heaven, it must have been an appalling sight, to witness in the dead stillness of the night, frantic fathers and mothers struggling hard against the roaring flood, to save themselves and little ones, their own flesh and blood. The watchmen tried to patch the breach, but all was in vain, because the banks were sodden with the long prolonged rain, and driven along by a high wind which brought the last strain, which caused the water with resistless fury to spread o'er the plain. And the torrent poured into the valley of La Chia River, sweeping thousands of people before it, ere a helping hand could them deliver. Oh, it was horrible to hear the crashing of houses fallen on every side, as the flood of rushing water spread far and wide. The Chinese offer sacrifice to the water spirits twice a year, and whether the water spirits or God felt angry, I will not aver, but perhaps God has considered such sacrifices a sin, and has drowned so many thousands of them for not worshipping him. How wonderful are the works of God, at times among his people abroad. Therefore let us be careful of what we do or say, for fear God doth suddenly take our lives away. The province of Honan is about half the size of Scotland, dotted over with about 3,000 villages, most grand, and inhabited by millions of people of every degree, and these villages and people were transformed into a raging sea. The deluge swept on over the fertile and well-cultivated land, and the rushing of the mighty torrent no power could withstand, and the appalling torrent was about 20 feet deep, and with resistless fury everything before it did sweep. Methinks I see the waste of surging waters and hear its deafening roar, and on its surface I see corpses of men and women by the score, and the merciless torrent in the darkness of the night, sportively tossing them about. Oh, what a horrible sight! Besides, there were buffaloes and oxen, timber, straw and grain. Also 3,000 villagers were buried beneath the waters of the plain, and multitudes beneath their own roofs have found a watery grave, while struggling hard, no doubt, poor souls, their lives to save. Therefore, good people, at home or abroad, be advised by me and trust more in God than the people of Honan, the benighted Chinese, for fear God punished you likewise for your iniquities. Extraordinary. Now, you can find all of his works online, William McGonagall online, and there's I found some interesting comments that followed that poem. Elsie Nielsen says, the novel ingenuity of rhyming dismay and delay makes this poem stand out among other gems. Chris Hunt replies, it's a good deal more ingenious than rhyming fertility in China, as he does in the second stanza. Daniel says, this is one of McGonagall's more offensive poems. We can forgive him for being a terrible poet, that is why we love him. But his suggestion that God drowned these people for not worshipping him is McGonagall at his very worst. And then Chris Hunt says, with such views, Daniel, it's a pity McGonagall never got the chance to stand for UKIP. Okay, I'd like to finish with a work by Ivor Cutler. Ivor Cutler, another Scots eccentric maverick, outsider type. Interestingly enough, all of the people I've been reading from and referring to are teetotal. So quite an interesting match with Whisky. Ivor Cutler, a little bio. Ivor Cutler was a Scottish poet, songwriter and humorist. He became known for his regular performances on BBC Radio, and in particular his numerous sessions recorded for John Peel's influential radio programme, and later for Andy Kershaw's programme. He appeared in the Beatles' Magical Mystery Tour film in 1967, and on Neil Innes's television programmes. Cutler also wrote books for children and adults, and was a teacher at A.S. Neil's Summerhill School, and for 30 years in inner city schools in London. He told Andy Kershaw on his radio show that he also gave private poetry lessons to individuals. In live performances, Cutler would often accompany himself on a harmonium. So, we don't have a harmonium, fortunately, but what we do have is a room full of people who can create a harmonium-like drone over which I will sing his song, Beautiful Cosmos. Okay? So the note I would like you to hum is Okay, keep going. And I'm going to use, some of you maybe have been to samba drumming classes. That means volume up. And this means volume down. And when I do this, not by tempo, that means stop. Okay, sorry. You need to keep this going for about a minute and a half. Feel free to breathe as well. You are the center of your little world, and I am of mine. Now and again we meet for tea, we're two of a kind. This is our universe, cups of tea. We have a beautiful cosmos, you and me. We have a beautiful cosmos. What do we talk of whenever we meet? Nothing at all. I sit with the sandwich, you look at a roll. Sometimes I open my mouth, then shut it. We have a beautiful cosmos, you and me. We have a beautiful cosmos. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Keep it going. Guys, did everyone with the glass get a 4? Did we miss anyone? Okay, good.
Uh-oh. It started.
So Dummy Jim is from the village. Matt. Hey, Matt. Alright, or ignore me. Dummy Jim is... Where's Dummy Jim from? What village? Campbell. Cairnbull. Right, which is on the east coast of Scotland in Speyside. Speyside is one of the 5 officially recognized whiskey-producing regions of Scotland. So I've picked a very easy Speyside to start with. The classic Glenfiddich 12, one of the most imported single malt scotches in the world. I could, teach you how to drink scotch. The whole sipping, front of the tongue, no big gulps. Breathe through it, but it doesn't really matter. Drink however you like. I will say one thing about Glenfiddich, which is about 4 years ago, Donald Trump Donald. He called for a boycott of Glenfiddich. And I'll quote him as to why. To think that a product like Glenfiddich would recognize a man like Michael Forbes, who lives in a property which I have accurately described in the past as a total pigsty, a man who loves the attention he has gotten because of his so-called fights with Donald Trump, would receive an award over someone like Andy Murray. Glenfiddich's choice of Michael Forbes as top Scot will go down as one of the great jokes ever played on the Scottish people, and is a terrible embarrassment to Scotland. I make a pledge that no Trump property will ever do business with Glenfiddich or William Grant and Sons. Michael Forbes refused to vacate his house because Donald Trump wanted to build a golf course over it. To the Donald.
Cheers to that.
All right, our next two whiskeys are going to be American. If you still have whiskey in your glass, please try your best to finish. By the way, the Glenfiddich profile, of course, it's light, but there's a very recognizable fruit characteristic. It's pear. If you want to take a sniff and smell it with your lips open, it helps. How's it going?
Okay, here we go.
All right, our next speaker, appropriately enough, is an American. I guess I should tell you a little bit about American whiskey. The kind of whiskey that we most associate with the U.S. probably is bourbon, right? So Kentucky is where 95% of the world's bourbon is made, and the reason for that, and in fact the reason that it's called bourbon, was because there used to be a county in Kentucky called Bourbon County, and that's where people made American whiskey. Interestingly enough, Bourbon County in Kentucky now makes no bourbon, so it doesn't have to be from there. In fact, the next two whiskeys we have are from the great state of Oregon, which is doing a lot of wonderful things with their spirits. Okay, so the bottle here, we have a whippersnapper, which confusingly enough is not a bourbon, but I will explain the difference to you in a little bit. I'd like to introduce to the stage Larry Feign, who is a cartoonist whose work has appeared in Time, Newsweek, The Economist, Fortune, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, etc., to name just a few. He was the cartoonist at SCMP before butting heads with the editor, as so many creative and unapologetic and unself-censoring artists do, and then he was fired. Larry.
My mother, who some of you have heard about, lives in Oregon. I don't know how to follow what just went on here. You're not going to have to hum. But I want to explain a little bit the story, well, why I wrote what I'm going to read, I've been a cartoonist for many years, and I don't know if anyone knows about the process of cartooning. A lot of people ask me, what comes first, the drawing or the words? Well, it's obvious the words have to come first. Cartooning is storytelling, and so my process is write the thing first, and then you know what to draw. And the writing of a cartoon, getting serious here for a moment, is akin to writing poetry. You have to write words, you have to whittle the thing down to as few words as possible and still maintain a certain rhythm, maintain a certain voice, and so on. So for me, writing, I used to do comic strips in the paper, 4 panels, and it would take me minimum, if I was having a good day, it'd take me minimum 3 hours to write each one, but sometimes take me 2 days to come up with just one idea, because, you know, the obvious jokes are written early in one's career, and then everything after that is like, as one author I like puts it, I think might have been Hemingway actually said it, that the process of writing is staring at a blank piece of paper until blood comes out your forehead. And that's what writing cartoons is like. Then once it's written, then you have to draw the damn thing. And after many, many years of that, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to write and rewrite and get it just right, and then I can go home, I don't have to draw anything. And so when I was approached by a magazine in Hong Kong where I live to do cartoons for them, I said, forget it. Why don't you just let me write words without drawings? And this editor gave me a chance, and so I was writing a column, a regular column for them about just whatever topic I fancied, and I'm going to read you one of those. Now, one more thing about this. Being a Hong Kong resident for many years, I am a Hong Kong patriot. And I am a Cantonese speaker, and down with Mandarin is what I always used to say. Until, and that's what I'm going to read to you, an article that I published called Chinese on $9 a day. I needed a cup of coffee. Excuse me, coffee? Where finding? How to say it in Mandarin? I was walking up and down the central shopping street of Zhongshan, a southern Chinese industrial city, with mountains of copy Rolexes and iPhones on every corner, but not a coffee bean to be found. Not even instant. I felt like a babbling, helpless moron, unable to find someplace, any place in the entire city to get something stronger than jasmine tea. Despite being located in Guangdong province, not a single person spoke Cantonese, much less English. I departed Zhongshan with a massive caffeine withdrawal headache and a determination to finally learn the most widely spoken first language on earth. So back home, I bought a Teach Yourself CD and pushed play. Out poured a stream of sentences like 谁是谁上 and 谢谢书生上, and everything all blended together into one long sibilant 是是是是是. I woke up with drool all over the textbook. Maybe I should try a real teacher, I decided. Forget classes, though. In language classes, there's always someone smarter, and there's at least one with a big mouth, leaving me choking in the linguistic dust. So I Googled. I found a dozen ads for one-on-one instruction from all over China via online video calls. At cost so low, I figured that either the instructors were animated fakes like the Beijing Olympics fireworks, or they were sweatshops with hundreds of people chained to computers chanting Ni Hao Ma at one-eyed webcams. Some ads were indistinguishable from Asian dating sites. There were rows and rows of pretty young female teachers, each one with a description underneath about how cute her voice was. I'm not making this up. I thought, One place touted university-trained teachers from China and a come-on for a free lesson. Nothing to lose, I thought. I typed in my Skype ID and hit enter. Within seconds, I received a call. I clicked answer. My jaw dropped to my lap. A dazzling beauty, straight out of a fashion magazine, with long, thick, licorice black hair and straight-cut bangs, gave me a smile that would melt a glacier. "Hi, are you Larry?" she said in perfect English. "Oh, you look so good." My brain sizzled like pop rocks. Maybe she thought all Westerners looked alike. Maybe instead of a 50-year-old bald schlemiel who'd forgotten to shave that morning, maybe to her I was the spitting image of Johnny Depp. She introduced herself as my academic advisor. She asked a few questions and set up an appointment for my free lesson. That afternoon, I received my introductory tutorial from another young woman. No fashion model, but charming enough through the slightly fuzzy webcam. Never reciting a canned curriculum, she turned in a virtuoso performance, riffing off little remarks I'd made, improvising the vocabulary, always returning to the theme of subject, verb, object. It was like a cross between jazz poetry and impeccably fine teaching. Then it was back to my slim, sultry academic advisor. I didn't know whether it was the competent teaching that convinced me or the way my advisor flicked her hair. I signed up for a year. I almost... 5 days a week. I almost asked her to marry my son. Or me. The next day, yet another young woman introduced herself as my assigned teacher. Rocking her shoulders, she smiled sweetly and introduced herself as Serena. "Oh, you look so kind," she said in a soft Mandarin accent. "Like you're my nice grandfather." What happened to Johnny Depp? At least she blew away any lingering suspicion that I was dealing with an online brothel. So now I was learning Chinese in my own home from a hard-working, patient tutor thousands of miles away with, don't tell my wife, a lovely smile, for less than $9 an hour, of which she may be getting what, no more than 2.5? We spent every day together, 5 mornings a week, for nearly 2 years, until she left me for a job at an international school. Is this the future of teaching? Will we be studying alone, learning languages, history, business, and math one-on-one from our personal tutors, while teachers' salaries worldwide adjust downward to match what I pay a young woman in Shanxi province? I wonder how much a made-in-China law degree will cost me. Thank you.
That Larry Feign, such a whippersnapper. So this whiskey, the Whippersnapper, is a pot-distilled, handcrafted whiskey made from Ransom Spirits in Oregon. I mentioned that it's not a bourbon. Bourbons, so whereas single malts are made only from barley, bourbons can be made from different grains, but the only requirement is that it contain at least 51% corn. Right? So it could be 51% corn and 49% barley, or it could have some rye or wheat or whatever, but at least 51% corn. Spirit whiskeys, and I'm going to read this because I actually don't really know what this means. But spirit whiskeys are blended whiskeys made mostly of neutral grain spirits and blended with some form of straight whiskey for flavoring. Whippersnapper in particular is 79% Kentucky White Dog corn whiskey and 21% malted barley whiskey. Aged between 6 months and 2 years in a mixture of used and unused Kentucky bourbon barrels as well as Pinot Noir barrels. It is a young whiskey. It is an upstart. It's its own category and it's very good. Get some chocolate notes in here. You guys see? So I can't mention American whiskeys without also mentioning the state of Tennessee. I almost said great state of Tennessee. So whereas bourbons originated, sorry, anyone from Tennessee here? Sorry. Tennessee is known for something called sour mash, and in particular, in particular the sour mash called Jack Daniels. Okay. Sour mash is a process that uses material from an older batch of mash, and they insert it to start fermentation in the batch currently being made. So it's like making sourdough bread. You're taking something and putting it in. The final product isn't sour or anything, but the mash that is added is called spint mash, or spent beer, as it's sometimes called, and it's used in animal feed. There's really no reason for you to know any of this, except as it relates to our next story, which is set in Tennessee. Right? Before we get to that, how are we doing, by the way? We is drinking? Good. The next whiskey we're going to try is called Temperance. It is a straight bourbon whiskey. And I'll note really quick that to be called a straight bourbon, it has to be aged in brand new charred white oak barrels. Okay, so bourbons have to be aged in unused oak barrels. Afterwards, those barrels get sold to Scotland or Japan to make single malts, which have to be aged in used barrels. Right? So that's the whiskey industry for you. Temperance. This is an amazing bourbon. Julia, can you open that? Ladies will come around. Our next speaker is Valeria Luiselli, who is the author of the internationally acclaimed novel Faces in the Crowd, which won the LA Times Book Prize for First Fiction, and most recently, The Story of My Teeth. Some of you might have caught her doing a solo book talk here today. She is a rising literary star whose work has appeared in publications including the New York Times, the New Yorker, Granta, and McSweeney's. In 2014, she won the National Book Foundation's 5 Under 35 Award. Born in Mexico City, she grew up in South Africa and has a wonderful accent. Valeria.
I don't know about my accent. I mean, right now I'm a person with, this afternoon I was a person with a lot of jet lag, and now I'm a person with a lot of jet lag and 3 whiskeys. But I feel okay, and I feel really sorry for my fellow writers who are reading after me, already after the 4th and 5th, when everyone's going to start overdosing and things are going to start happening there. So I was going to read a story, Anthony, that happened in Tennessee, and that was about a dog overdosing on painkillers, but I decided not to. So this story takes place, it doesn't matter where, and but it relates to temperance. So you can just think of the concept of temperance while you hear me. There's no humming, and I'm not a cartoonist, so you're just going to have to fixate on the writing itself. My uncle, Marcelo Sanchez Proust, once wrote in his diary, "When a man is asleep, he has in a circle around him the chain of the hours, the sequence of the years, the order of the heavenly host. Instinctively, when he wakes, he looks to these, and in an instant reads off his own position on the earth's surface and the amount of time that has elapsed during his slumbers. But this ordered procession is apt to grow confused and to break its ranks. I never feel confused or break anything when I wake up. I'm unbreakable and unconfoundable like all simple men. Every day I return to the waking world with the beautiful, uncomplicated certainty of my modest but firm early morning erections. And I'm not unusual. Quite the reverse. Recent scientific studies show that the very first thing the great majority of men notice on waking up in the morning is the turgidity and rigidity of their sexual organs. There's no mystery in this. During the night, the body pumps blood to the male member to maintain the temperature needed for its health and normal functioning. As a consequence, many men wake up with a powerful and proud erection, the intensity of which also acts as a first anchor to the world during the transition from sleep to wakefulness. Women don't experience anything like that, and so often feel completely disoriented when they open their eyes. They don't have that gentle charon to mark out the road from one world to the other. This phenomenon of the male constitution, known in common parlance as the tent effect, is a biological event and in no way psychological. But like so many other biological phenomena, it can quickly become a matter of mental and spiritual health. If the erection is left unattended and has to go down on its own during the first sips of coffee or under the shower, a man accumulates malignant humors that engulf him in resentment and rage throughout the day. He becomes circumspect, taciturn, secretly aggressive, and can even begin to harbor perfidious thoughts toward his fellow citizens, including members of his family and his colleagues. Yeah, you know, right? However, if the person that sleeps next to him shows empathy and frees the organ from the accumulation of bodily fluids, the man remains mild and self-controlled the whole day. One might even say easygoing and philanthropic. End of explanation. My uncle, Marcelo Sanchez Proust, who had many theories about many things, used to say that a man should marry a woman who had an understanding attitude toward this natural condition of men. You have to find a madame, he would say, who tempers the fury that accumulates during the long sleepless hours of men who are sensitive to the elasticity of time. Whatever he might have meant, he would go on to add that that was why he had married my Aunt Nadia and had remained faithful to her until death did them part. The poor woman died of angina pectoris, like our founding father Benito Juarez. It may be that Aunt Nadia hid her light under a bushel, and though she might have dressed like a teacher in an orphanage, she was undoubtedly a virtuoso of early morning fornication. I, in contrast, never had any luck in that department. Perhaps because the luck of a lucky man, as is my case, is distributed so that it doesn't quite reach the most recondite corners of human experience, like the bell curve theory. Flacca did her duty by me until she got pregnant, that is for approximately 2 weeks. After that, zilch. She was always rather lacking in generosity in relation to other people's needs, above all mine. But neither did I find early morning solace with the other woman in my life. Angelica, who was far from ugly, used to wake up with her mouth smelling of chicken. So it was me who refused physical contact. Erica, on the other hand, had a strange resemblance to the ex-president Felipe Calderón while she was sleeping. I think because her face became a little swollen, particularly the lips and nose and eyebrows. Much as I would have liked to dissipate my pent-up humors inside her, as soon as I saw her there puffed up and deformed by sleep, identical to the president of those dark years in Mexico, I would be so terrified that I'd get silently out of bed and tiptoe away to find myself a cup of strong coffee. And Esther, finally, was extremely bad-tempered in the morning. I never dared to snuggle up to her for fear she'd set about me with a chain she kept handy in her drawer. So I used to let her make the first move, which usually consisted of giving me chain in hand a difficult-to-interpret polysyllabic command along the lines of highway on your knees and give it time, or maybe highway muffet diving time, or simply highway satisfy me. But as, thankfully, Esther almost never made the first move, I learned to resign myself to my fate. I've got an unparalleled talent for resignation, like all Catholic men. Thank you.
That was from The Story of My Teeth, which I hope you still have copies left in the Bookworm. I'm not sure. You might check afterwards. As Valeria was reading, Alec whispered maybe we should have had her go last, but I don't know about you. After 5 whiskeys, I have no excess of turgidity.
Too much information, Doc.
What do you guys think of Temperance? How would you compare this to Whippersnapper? Better? So Whippersnapper is a little bit, I feel like it's lighter, and this is much richer. You kind of have layers, you sort of have to, I think we're at that time of the night where you can smack your lips a little bit when you're tasting these. Actually, so the distributor of Ransom products, including Whippersnapper and Temperance, which is from a distillery called Bull Run in Portland, is sitting right there. Crystal. Thank you for these. I don't know if I should admit this, but I've personally bought 3 bottles of Temperance within the last 2 weeks. Dave. Thank you, David. Yes, very intemperate of me. And 2 of the bottles are empty. Before... all right. We're going to move back to Scotch. Before I do that, I must thank the originator of this idea, Whiskey and Writers. It began as Rum and Writers?
Writers and Rum.
Writers and Rum. It evolved into Stories and Scotch, and this is the 3rd iteration of it. So Alec Ash over here was the one who thought of the idea and organized the first 2. So let's give a hand for Alec. He runs the blog The Anthill. He's got a book forthcoming, and he writes for the LA Times Review of Books and some other places. And his favorite whiskey, I believe, is Talisker. Talisker is one of your favorites, right? The Talisker 10 from the Isle of Skye. I'll just tell you more about it after we hear from Alec. So Alec is the co-editor of an anthology of expat writing called While We're Here, and he will be reading a piece from that book. So Alec, come on up.
Thank you, Anthony, and Julia and Mariana and everyone else who has been organising this. It is true, I confess, that it's out of my closet alcoholic brain that the idea for this evening came. We've had Writers and Rum, we've had Scotch and Stories, we've got Whiskey and Writers, and I welcome ideas for any future alliterative iterations. Any takers? Tequila, brandy and books, tequila, vodka and violence. Take that outside. Tequila and tales. Tequila and Twitter. Whenever I'm on Twitter, I always drink tequila. Okay, so I suppose I am the local author representing local Beijing, and I'm going to read a local tale. I think I'm also the only writer who requested his own whiskey, so not to steal Anthony's thunder. Talisker was the first Scotch whiskey which I ever drank. I was 18, it was in my college bar, and it's a very salty whiskey, and it comes from the sea. It comes from a wave-swept island. It's kept in quite salty, briny casks. So it's a whiskey that speaks to the ocean, and of course the Chinese word for foreigners in China is yang guizi, if you like, ocean devils. And I'm reading a story about being a foreigner in China. It's from this anthology, which Anthony kindly mentioned while we're here. Copies available. And it's about my experiences getting to know my neighbours in the hutong in which I live. And I'm going to throw you into the middle of the story and continue to the end if I don't think you're getting bored. Mr. Xi has been turning his home into a fortress ever since I moved in, but I keep telling myself there's no connection. First he erected a steel gate outside his front door. Then he railed off the back door staircase to stop others from locking their bikes to it. Finally, in the spring, he broadened his horizons by adding an extra story. Perhaps he was a fan of Tang poetry. Did anyone get that joke? David did. His neighbours learnt of his decision when a construction team started laying bricks on the roof, until his building was exactly half a metre taller than my own, and conveniently blocked the once lovely scenery over the rooftops from my study window, where I did most of my writing. I called it the ugliest view in the world. One morning, two very fierce-looking Chongguan, the urban management police, showed up. They told Mr. Xi that his impromptu addition was illegal, and another team of workers tore through its roof with pneumatic drills. Then they just left it there, for Mr. Xi to take the rest down. Mrs. Wang, my neighbour, gossiped to me later that one of our neighbours must have called the Chongguan, as the building was blocking their sunlight. To this day, no one knows who it was. Mr. Xi left the building as it was, roofless, unpainted. Loose bricks lying on top of the walls directly over the entrance, for over a year. I had half a mind to call up the Chongguan to mention this, but remembered Kaiser Kuo's mantra for foreigners in China, don't be a whiny little bitch. While Mr. Xi kept the neighbours out, I finally felt settled in. As spring turned to summer, I planted vegetables on my rooftop, and failed miserably. The pak choi was decimated by bugs. The tomatoes were scorched by the sun, the aubergines and courgettes never made it out of the seed. Some mornings I did Tai Chi up there, swivelling around to face the middle school opposite, only to see hundreds of gawking faces pressed up against the school classroom windows. I could negotiate the labyrinth of hutongs now, and became friends with our local Kuwaiti delivery guy. It had taken over a year, but my neighbours were finally greeting me by name, stopping for a chat, rather than simply gawking at me. I suspect it was the dog. James and Christina, an author and journalist, had moved into the flat below me. We called our building Writer's Block. Give you a chance to roll your eyes. And Christina found a stray dog on the street, flea-ridden and pitiful. They already had two dogs, Calvin and Hobbes, and I was now living alone, so they deposited Ginger upstairs with me, despite my protestations that I was a cat person. Within a month, I had formally adopted Ginger, and entered a hitherto closed society of dog owners who exchanged curt nods while our pets sniffed each other's rear in a canine yin-yang. To the community, I was no longer a foreigner. I was a foreigner with a dog. Which presumably meant neither of us would be leaving anytime soon. Between Ginger's constitutionals and a new habit of jogging before sunset, I got to know a wider radius around me. Each run excavated a fresh finding. The perpetually pyjama-clad Mr. Whose retirement project was to endlessly decorate his tuk-tuk with colourful stars, stuffed animals, and 2 flags on a weekly rotation. The fish store owner who painted classical landscapes, the old codger who I thought was chirping at me until he produced a cricket from his inside jacket pocket. The hunchbacked lady who beat her dog with a badminton racket, and is possibly a lovely person otherwise. Not likely so. Like the Mexicans. Well, I have had 4 glasses of whiskey.
Yeah, right.
When jogging through one block of hutongs got old, I moved on to explore the next one across. I counted the passing months by yellow hutong weasel sightings. These critters only came out in the dead of night or pre-dawn hours, flashing past like a gunshot, and I might see 2 or 3 a year. If they were the true long-term residents, the hutongs were shifting around them. By weasel number 5, the stir-fry and Twinings restaurant that I used to go to had become a fruit store. At weasel number 6, the manga figurine store was an electric scooter shop, and Miss Muesli, a homemade granola store, had opened opposite. The cosplay hangout became a bistro cafe around the time of weasel sighting 7. Sometimes one would get up on its hind paws and look about for a second, as if to warn us, Nanlo Gusiang is coming. The foreigners came and went, although that was true of the young Chinese as well who lived in the courtyard. The Russians next to me had split up, and the sounds of loud Slavic coitus were replaced by Maxim's band, rehearsing Stand By Me and Don't Worry, Be Happy. James downstairs hosted a weekly role-playing game, and I spectated while the group talked and rolled dice for half an hour before realizing that in the fictional realm of Rokugan, only 5 seconds of action had passed. When one new arrival in Beijing asked me about the floating fluff balls in spring, the liu su, the willow catkin pollen, I told him it was PM 2.5. Every leaving party for an expat friend at a bar felt like our own ghost day ritual, burning paper money for the departed. My neighbour Christina wrote an article about how the very aspects of hutong life that draw foreigners to live here put off Chinese looking for more modern convenience. The same old downtown area, she wrote, of our district has become a hotspot for hipster expats who ride bikes, watch earnest documentaries, do Tai Chi on their rooftops. Burn. But for better or worse, when your breakfast options include a doughy youtiao from the street market and custom-made granola from a shop called Miss Muesli, it's clear that the neighbourhood has evolved to accommodate its foreign population, and it isn't going to change back. A year after the roof of Mr. Xi's extra story was knocked down by the Changguan, he figured that enough time had passed, hired a new team to re-roof and tar it over, and fixed solar power cylinders on top. He kitted out the rooftop next to it with wooden furniture, dangled vines from metal beams, grew watermelon, and put in a chicken coop. Every morning I was woken by a rooster, who on smoggy days kept cawing until late, unsure of whether the sun had come out or not. By now I was used to it, and he was used to me. He gave me the combination code to his fortress so I could lock my bike inside, and his 10-year-old still waves at me when he climbs the steps outside. Foreigners in China have always tried to romanticize the place. My go-to example is Carl Eskelund, a Danish journalist here in the 1930s, who later became famous for punching Chiang Kai-shek's son. He wrote, Peking has no tooting motor cars, no smoky factories, no ugly modern concrete buildings. This is in the 1930s. The temples, the mysterious forbidden city, the cozy dwelling houses with their intricate courtyards and gracefully slanting roofs all stand today as they did when Peking was capital of the Middle Kingdom. End quote. Perhaps it's that projection of an authentic past that we idealize until we're swept along by the authentic present with its tooting motor cars and its ugly modern concrete buildings, which is far more interesting. When it comes to the hutongs, I don't get what's romantic about grey-painted alleyways speckled with dog poo and spit. But they do force you to be part of a neighbourhood and to change along with it. When the present becomes the past at such rapid clip as it does in China, you can find yourself feeling nostalgic for something from only a year ago, as if it was 10 years ago. Yet it's that sense of community and premature nostalgia that creates the esprit de corps and that keeps those of us who have left coming back. Between DPM clampdowns and visa worries, on a bad China day, it can feel like we're not welcome here. The government's narrative, after the century of humiliation, is that foreigners pass through China, but they will never belong. Yet everyone is swept along in the same flux. We make our own homes, and we take them with us. 10 years on, perhaps I will be just another memory for my neighbours. I like to think that they'll still be here, rooting through boxes of pak choy in the veggie market at the entrance, while a new generation of foreigners pass by. Much of Xiguan Hutong will no doubt be different, but the kernel will still be the same, a constant defined by cycles of change. And some days in the brief hiatus between summer and winter, or winter and summer, when the first cold bites and it feels like the year has reset, there's even a beauty to the haze of smog that disperses light evenly over the narrow alley walls and all the life squeezed in between them. In moments like that, I can't imagine being anywhere else. Thank you.
Very true words. By the way, Robert Louis Stevenson, in the poem The Scotsman's Return from Abroad, said, "The king of drinks as I conceive it, Talisker, Isla, or Glenfiddich." So the Talisker was also Robert Louis Stevenson's favorite. There is something distinctive about the Talisker, so you might have figured it out. It's smoky. But the more accurate word you might use is it's peaty. So what is peat? Some of you know, some of you don't. To explain, I guess maybe I'll just talk really quick about the whiskey making process. So you start by steeping barley in water, and then you spread it out over a floor. Traditionally, it's over a floor. I'm not sure how some of the more industrial distilleries do it now, and then you allow the barley to germinate, and that usually takes about a week. And then when that's stopped, you dry it, right? You dry it. These days, you dry it in a kiln. After that, you ground it in a mill, crush into grist, and then add hot water, add yeast, it ferments. You boil it, the alcohol rises into pipes, you distill it, and then you do that again. And then afterwards you get a spirit that you can use, that you can then put into an oak cask. But to go back a couple steps, sometimes, back in the day, I suppose, in some places, instead of drying the malt in a kiln or with coal, you would do it with the smoke from an organic compound called peat, which you'd find in the ground. And the process these days has changed a little bit. Modernization hasn't always been the best for many different industries. For whiskey, it's there are very few distilleries that still use peat. That still use peat smoke to dry the malt in the way that it used to be done. And the way they used to do it was they would light the peat and they would let the smoke rise through the floorboards where the wet malt was on top, and then they let it dry that way. I don't think Talisker does it that way anymore. They just purchase it from some sort of factory that does it all. But the characteristic sort of grainy smoke that you smell from it is because of the peat. Okay? All right, one more to go. By the way, so Lefroy is one of the few distilleries that still does the peating in the old-fashioned way. So we have a Lefroy 18 on our shelves. That's excellent. One of my favorites. So in the 1860s, blending was introduced in Scotland. Okay. So I mentioned one part of the definition of single malt. It has to be barley, right? That's the one grain that they're allowed to use. But the actual word single in single malt doesn't refer to the number of grains, but rather the number of distilleries. In this case, well, in the case of all single malts, just one. So whatever's on the label, Talisker, for instance, or Lefroy, or Glenfiddich, that's the only distillery in which that was made, that single malt was made. Blended whiskies come from multiple single malts. For instance, probably the most popular blend in the world, Johnny Walker. Johnny Walker Black Label is a mix of Oban, Talisker. Help me out. Oban, Talisker. Anyone? I just blinked. I've said this like a dozen times.
Glenfiddich.
You guys can Google it later, but so in the 1860s that process began, and there's a real art to blending whiskeys, right? So the goal is to create something that's replicable and that's characteristic. Hibiki 12 is one of Japan's best-selling whiskeys and one of the best. It's made by Suntory, which is Japan's largest whiskey producer, and this one is made primarily of Yamazaki and Hakushu, right? There's been in the last really 6 months, due to various factors. Some of you might know that the Yamazaki 2006 won World Whiskey of the Year last year, and as a result, you can't find any of that anymore in the market. But Japanese whiskeys, the demand for Japanese whiskeys have skyrocketed. The Hibiki 12 is still a somewhat affordable Japanese whiskey, even though it is the most expensive one of these 5. It's I'm going to trust that it's very good, but I myself have not tried it yet. So maybe let's compare notes in 10 minutes. After our final speaker comes up to the podium, she is Han Yujoo, who is a writer and translator from Seoul. She has published 5 books and translated Michael and Jockey and Jeff Dyer into Korean. She was awarded the Literature and Society's New Writers Award for her short story To the Moon in 2003 and the prestigious Hankuk Ilbu Literary Award in 2009. Yujoo currently teaches and runs the independent press, Oli Po Press. I hope I'm saying that right. And her most recent book is the novel The Impossible Fairy Tale. Han Yujoo.
I'm Yujoo. I'm Yujoo and I'm from South Korea. And I think I am the only non-English speaker here, so I feel very honored and humiliated at the same time. And I didn't pick the Hibiki by myself, but I already tried that one in Japan. I visited the distillery in Osaka. You guys should visit there. I think I already drunk. So. I wrote a kind of essay of my personal confession. Once I tried to steal my father's whiskey, and I was not very young. I was over 30 years old. Okay, I will just read, and it's very short. Please forgive my awful and awkward English.
No, your English is very good.
Thank you. You're very kind. When I heard the theme, whiskey and writers, I tried to recall my first experience about whiskey, but I failed. I felt weird because I always drink it as many others. My favorite one is Balvenie, but it's a little bit expensive in my country, so I usually drink Scotch Blue. Do you know Scotch Blue? It's my cheap friend, and I don't know its gender, but definitely it's not, he or she is not Korean. No. I mean, he or she is Korean. He is not Scotch. Frankly speaking, drinking whiskey is not helpful for writing. It bothers me. But after midnight, I cannot but think it. Before sun rises, drinking whiskey, sometimes I feel like the world is doomed. It's natural because I've written nothing and drunk. You may heard the movie titled Tomorrow, maybe? I don't remember the lines exactly, but there's a scene about whiskey in that movie. The world is doomed. It's really cold. People have no firewood or nothing for heating themselves. Someone says, "Let's burn whiskey." The other one replies, "Are you crazy? It's 12 years old." I thought the same thing. Burning whiskey? That's nonsense. That's insane. After watching that movie, I've drunk whiskey asking whether the world is or about to or already has been doomed. Hangover is always felt like a kind of aftermath. So I have lots of memories about whiskey. One of them is connected with my father. After entering college, I moved to Seoul by myself. That means I didn't live with my parents anymore. And someday I became a writer all of a sudden. Being a writer has been a really good excuse to my parents for not being married, not having a great job, and being an alcoholic. A few years ago, during the national holiday season, I went to parents' house. I watched the under-17 female football match with my father. My father was drinking, and I was drinking too. You may heard the name of the football player in Korean, Ji So-yeon. She is a great player. She scored a magnificent goal. I said to my father, if I were 10 years younger, I'd play at the ground like her. My father replied shortly and sharply, "You should be 20 years younger." 20 years more younger, yeah. We both laughed. We both liked football. We both liked Arsenal, the British football team. For me, watching a football game with him was the only way to spend time together and to be a good daughter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wasn't fully drunk to sleep tight. It was quiet. I went out of my bedroom. All the lights were off. I tiptoed to the display cupboard. In Korea, good whiskey is not something to drink. It's a kind of ornament. to show off the wealth. I silently opened the glass door and thrust my arm to the bottles, hesitating which one is better. There were two options, Johnny Walker Blue and Valentine, 30 years old.
Wow.
So I was hesitating. But then, at the same time, I sensed someone's presence. There was my father. He asked me with a puzzled face, "What are you doing?" I was so embarrassed and murmured meaningless words. Then my father said, giggling, "Take one, come home more often." I picked Johnny Walker Blue. I was really immature daughter who stole my father's treasure. A short time later, my father retired. There was no replacement for Johnny Walker in his cupboard. I drank it till the last drops. It was really good. Thank you.
All right, so toss out some words to describe this. Sweet and smooth. Yes, absolutely. It's intense, slightly smoky, vanilla maybe. Very efficient, well designed. Oh yeah, she said watery. You don't like it? Okay. You do hear that a lot. The difference between why is a Scotch a Scotch, whereas a Japanese single malt a Japanese single malt? The only reason is because the single malt in Scotland is made there, and so they don't. The Scottish Whisky Association doesn't allow any other country to call their product, their single malt, a Scotch, right? However, oh, by the way, but like the Johnny Walker is very much a Scotch, even though it's not a single malt, but it's because it's made in Scotland. Japanese whiskeys are known for being very well balanced and very well made. Maybe not as exciting though. But you sort of know what you're going to get, and this seems a very solid whiskey. Despite protestations from this. Right. And Yamazaki's not the greatest, but this is best. Alright, so if you enjoyed tonight's tasting, for those of you who are drinking, for those who are watching in the back, thank you very much. I feel like we should give you a round of applause for being here. So I host a weekly whiskey tasting at the Bookworm every Wednesday. It's called Whiskey Wednesday. It's not very creative. But if you're interested, just email me, Anthony@BeijingBookworm.com, or just go online, BeijingBookworm.com. Can we please give a huge round of applause for the beautiful Mariana and Julia? Us for. And of course, all the authors who read tonight, Matt, Larry, Valeria, Alec, Yujoo. And ladies and gentlemen, give yourselves a round of applause for sticking with us. There's one more day of the Literary Festival, and then it's all over. And then it's all over, maybe forever. Hopefully not. But please come on out. Hey, let's go out with a bang, okay? Tomorrow, come tomorrow for the party. Tonight we have live music by Jung Rin. They're going to be playing right now. By the way, the man at the door, Peter Goff, give him a round of applause. Director of the Literary Festival, manager of the Bookworm. Thank you all very much for coming and supporting the festival. I will see you around.
Yeah.